Hello and welcome to the podcast of University of Sarajevo, dedicated to 30-year commemoration of genocide in Srebrenica. Through the 6 episodes of the podcast, we will talk to 6 renowned experts who took part in the international scientific conference Srebrenica 30 years after the genocide, memory, responsibility, and the challenges of denial. My name is Tina Kalinic. I am Senior Assistant at the Academy of Performing Arts at the University of Sarajevo. And in the second episode, I have an honor of welcoming David J. Simon, a senior lecturer and the Assistant Dean for Graduate Education at the Jackson School of Global Affairs at Yale University. Okay, that's a big title.
It's a long title.
You also serve as the director of the Genocide Studies program and the Mass Atrocities in Digital Era initiative at Yale. Can you tell us a bit about that initiative?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tina, by the way, for first of all, for having me here. It's really an honor to be a part of this conference, to be here in Sarajevo at this time, this important moment for the commemoration of Srebrenica. And to be invited to participate in this podcast. So thank you for that. The initiative that you asked me about, the Mass Atrocities in the Digital Era, comes out of my work with the Genocide Studies program. And I had edited a volume called the Handbook of Genocide Studies, where I wrote a piece about the development of genocide studies as a field of study. And it occurred to me, I learned a lot from writing that piece about my own field, which was that it really came of age in the 1990s. After Srebrenica, after the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, after some of the documentation was coming to light about Cambodia, and it really put into sort of comparative context these horrible, dreadful, atrocious episodes with those of the Holocaust and maybe Armenia and genocide against indigenous populations in America and elsewhere. And so that was an important development. And I hadn't realized that the field was really that new in a way. The genocide studies programs like Yale's began at that point in time. But I also realized that the 1990s was it was an awkward time for a field to come of age because that was a decade, essentially the decade before the digital revolution. And that all of these sort of the founding fathers of the field and a few founding mothers of the field and the topics that they studied were non-digital. I don't know if analog quite describes it. But that at the same time, that meant the understanding that was sort of being propagated about genocide was happening outside of the digital realm, outside of what happened at the digital realm. I mean, sure, don't get me wrong, these professors have emails and whatnot. They use computers, but the episodes of genocide were sort of pre-digital in a way. And then, by the 2010s, we're looking at episodes like the genocidal persecution of the Rohingya in Myanmar, like the I'll use that phrase, genocidal persecution in a way because it's a little wiggly, but there's no formal designation, but they seem like they're genocidal, bear many characteristics of genocide. But the Uyghurs in China, the Rohingya in Myanmar. The Yazidi in Iraq. In each of these cases, there is a very strong digital element in the way the genocide is perpetrated, the way, especially in terms of incitement and mobilization of the population, dehumanization of the victim group. But also in the sort of many of the means and methods of perpetration, identifying faces. Genocide in a way is also it's an effort to reorganize society in a certain way, and the digital means of reorganizing society create these parallels that I think are important to understand. And then finally, that's just a long-winded answer to your question. I haven't even gotten to the initiative yet. Finally, remembrance is, increasingly takes place in the digital realm. We at Yale, we have a project called the Fortunov Archive of Holocaust video testimonies, which are on videotape. And around the turn of the century, that is around the year 2000, they started being transferred to digital storage. And digital storage enables all sorts of new sort of search functions, now AI use in search functions. So it's not just the way genocide happens, but the way we understand genocide and the way we study it is altered by digital means. So I created co-created an initiative to kind of examine these dynamics. And one of the things that I guess I'm allowed to be proud about it, one of the things that I'm proud about it is that it's something that I had been searching for in as long as I'd been involved with genocide studies, as a way to have students get more involved in the field. And I don't know if it was because non-digital history seems sort of old school and musty, but and by contrast, looking at digital dynamics, and also that the students know more than me about the digital realm. But there's been a lot of enthusiasm, and we started a student fellowship program where we meet close to weekly, discuss different topics. We have guest speakers, and the students are, I'd like to sort of think of it as almost like a lab, where the students are trying out different theories, different legal theories, and that their work product goes directly into the real world, unlike sort of seminar papers that end up being for the instructor's eyes only.
But digital era and everything that is happening in the digital world actually is pretty important also for aftermaths. So like 30 years later, we are discussing denial. And lots of those narratives actually show up in digital space.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that that really jumps out when you look at sort of digital transmission of ideas is, of course, through social media, is the role of the algorithm, and the way that the algorithm, it's capital A quotation marks. It sounds like this sort of big menace, and it is. But it is this idea that there's some set of code somewhere constantly being revised, proprietary to social media companies. We spend so much, even us fuddy-duddy old professors spend a lot of time on social media, and everything we do is being fed into, our actions are fed into this algorithm, that is these codes that help determine, oh, you're interested in this, well, you're likely going to also be interested in this kind of similar thing. And so the goal of the algorithm is to keep us engaged on social media, keep us from logging off, because that's how they make money. They need their eyeballs, they need that time spent online on their platform, on their app. So what social media companies have discovered, what the people behind the technology discovered, is that what engages people is more extreme content. That sort of moderate stuff is boring. And if you just sort of say, like, this is the history as it is, they'll log off. But more extremist views, conspiracy theories, rejection of the past, denial of genocides, that's the type of thing that kind of piques people's interests. And sometimes it's interest that's piqued in a very skeptical way. People are like, that can't be true, and I'm going to follow that to see where the flaw in their argument is. And other times it's piqued in a sort of, almost like luring in the fish. Yeah, it's, oh, I didn't realize that. And so, I think you have a rise in conspiracy theory generally in the internet era. And a lot of denialism takes the sort of form of a conspiracy theory. they want you to believe that this happened, but let me tell you, this didn't really happen, or at least not the way you thought it.
Yeah, and then people do love to be smart. So
and then they feel
like,
smart.
I am the one who understands that it is the wrong narrative. So it's like, I'm not conspiracy theorist. I'm just smarter.
Just smarter, right? It's right. You all fell for the line that they taught you in school. But let me tell you, I found something on the internet that said something different. But if you, it's packaged enough. And so I think digital literacy. One of our students is working on a digital literacy program this summer. For basically to help young people understand that. The internet isn't the arbiter of truth, and that there are these packages going on, these sort of algorithms, these programs that are trying to manipulate you in certain ways. I think we really need the digital literacy for adults. The kids are growing up with it, but
so they do understand a bit. But I do also feel that they don't have the experience. It's like where your mom would send you to check the dictionary.
Right. Right,
and it's like, I think we are the last generations who had that. It's like, yeah, Mom, it's like, and then you have that encyclopedia.
Oh, it's our prized possession was the encyclopedia.
So it is a kind of different, and I see that when talking to the students, that they actually don't understand the differences between references.
Yeah.
Encyclopedia and Wikipedia are the same.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, and this grown-up literacy is, I feel, a bit more complicated because lots of older, especially generation older than us, it's like it's somewhere in the middle, I have a feeling. Older than us, they don't know how to use it at all.
That's right. There's sort of a tendency for a kind of gullibility to seep in where, the internet, it can be so convenient if you're looking up recipes or how to change your oil or something like that. They don't tell you false information on how to do that. They might give you a bad recipe or something, but that's you learn to use that. But if it's the news, and also there's the generation grew up trusting the news. The people behind the desk that told you what happened that day, they were the most trustworthy people in society. And so I think you don't have the person behind the desk on the internet telling you the news. There may be some YouTube clips you do, but a lot of at least in the 2010s, the purveyor of misinformation was the Facebook news feed, the most infamous purveyor anyways. There are lots of them. But the Facebook news feed, I think, came in with that same, or people accepted it, especially, again, this sort of little bit older generation, because it's Facebook after all. Kids don't use Facebook anymore. This older generation came in sort of accepting and expecting if, what was on Facebook, if it had a certain tone, if it was written a certain way, it was trustworthy. And so it's fascinating. This is the work for the sort of semantics and semiotics understanding of how people communicate with one another and what sort of tropes and methods of framing issues gets people to believe them. But somebody did their study there and I think used it quite effectively.
Well, when we are coming to lots of different big words and terms, it's like I would actually like to touch upon something that you are going to be talking at the conference about, and that is idea of domicide. It is something that pops out from your abstract and from what you're talking about, and I have a feeling that it is not covered enough because we are dealing with lots of very big, important research, and then we forget about the idea of home.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. And domicide, it's one of these scholarly inventions of a word that sort of fits the need of initially of an author to a pair of authors for the paper that they were writing. But I think it's an extraordinarily useful word, and essentially it refers to destruction of the home as a political, but not just by fire or wrecking ball, but as a political project, as a project, a destructive project as part of conflict, and it draws that connection to genocide, fratricide, homicide, to suggest that we need to understand it as more than just, a home being destroyed or a house being destroyed, but rather it can be part of a project to destroy a community. A home is a house embedded in a community. A home is a house with a sensibility surrounding it that the people who live there believe that that's where they belong and that from which they forge all these connections. So destroying the house is one thing, but destroying that sense of home may have been what was particularly important to people, say, throughout Bosnia during the 92 to 95 during the war, when you see so many homes destroyed. You still see the shells of houses today. It wasn't necessarily tactical to destroy someone's house. Maybe there's a possibility that there might be a sniper in there or something. So you can understand there were tactical reasons. I wouldn't deny that, but the broader effort of trying to claim territory as, in the case of Srebrenica, as Serb, belonging to Serbs, meant that you had to not only destroy the places where non-Serbs, Bosniaks in particular, lived, you had to destroy their connection to the place. You had to destroy their sense of home. And that is, at least for me, how I interpret this word domicide.
Yeah, and then it actually connects very nicely to the memory studies, because there is this term again coined by this researcher who needed it, but I love it. It's lieu de mémoire, yes, by Pierre Nora, and it actually talks about place or an object that is a container of the memory, and then the whole cultural memory stems out of it. And it is interesting when you are talking about how the whole project of domicide in Srebrenica was important and very well executed. It's unfortunately, it is very well executed. Yeah. How it actually then continues into this idea of the site of memory, because there are two different types. There are the ones that are lost and the ones that are made.
Yes. No, very good point. And in a way, I mean, the presentation that I'll give this afternoon is related to not so much about the destruction of the homes, but the effort to return to those homes and some of the many obstacles that were placed in the way of returning. Whether they're political or bureaucratic or economic obstacles. And so part of the function is that these homes then can never really become lieu de mémoire in the Nora terms, Nora sense of it. It's this effort to prevent the reconnection with community and to force, whatever memory happens, it's going to happen outside, which makes incidentally, the Memorial Center and the cemetery at Producirao is such an interesting place because, that is such a, intense kind of lieu de mémoire. There's so much, memory. There's ghosts, it feels like, when you're there, that it pervades the place, and it's right in the heart of where there was such a big effort to prevent that stuff from happening. But maybe there's a trade-off. Maybe the idea was, well, okay, there can be this memorial center, and people can go have commemorations every year, but we're going to make it very difficult for there to be resettlement of Bosnians back into the places where we destroyed their homes, we being Serbs in that construction.
Yeah, but what do you see as the biggest obstacle? Because you said there are lots of different obstacles. Yeah. What is the biggest one from your point of view?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I've attempted to put them in order, and they probably vary quite a bit for different people and different experiences, and they varied over time as well. There was an effort to make it easy for people to go back, because initially, going back is difficult financially and emotionally, and there was an effort to normalize that, to provide funds so that you could go back, identify your house, maybe start the process of reclaiming your property, and in a way that was, I think, envisioned as the the hard part, but that was actually sort of the easy part. I think the two hardest parts are political obstruction. Maybe that's not quite the right word. The two hardest parts are, first, obstruction of the idea of belonging, which is to say that the local community, it's not just a matter of the bureaucratic obstacles that I mentioned before. Oh, you need this paper signed, and we won't be able to sign it until
we're famous for that. So that doesn't even count.
Right.
That works everywhere.
Sure, exactly. And so probably people just expected it and figured that was life as normal. But the sort of sense, the Serbianizing names of towns, this sort of sense that, trying to create a sense that people were unwelcome to return, that they couldn't restore their community. I mean, going back to the destruction of mosques or toppling of minarets, it's not so much, and sometimes it was difficult to rebuild those mosques, and more difficult than it was to rebuild the homes, because the homes, the ownership was with the sort of private property, and it required greater negotiation with the town to rebuild a place of worship. But yeah, that attitude, that sort of sense of hostility, that it's hard to really put your finger on it or say this, or to measure it, but you know that it was there. The other are economic opportunities. I mean, it's not an area that's sort of economically booming. We're talking about the Srebrenica area now. The younger generation, if they've been in Sarajevo or if they've been elsewhere in Bosnia or they've been to Germany, they may see their future there and not back on, back in the village, as it were, or in the agricultural land. And so, it's a real challenge to think about what will this look like in another 30 years when, there are no adult survivors from...
Yeah, that's what I actually wanted to mention. It's like, because we are talking about 30 years after. So it is such a long passage of time when you think that so many citizens were killed. So they cannot return. It's okay, they returned, but not in a way that you want people to return
right,
home.
Exactly, yeah.
And then there is this other part, which is, why would the younger generation stay? Because, and that's also brings us a bit back to this idea of the site of memory, because from one point, it seems like the whole Srebrenica area became one big monument.
In a way, you're right. A monument, but not a living monument. Almost, it's not a dead monument, but a monument to the dead, among other things, and not a monument to the living. I think that's right, and I think that it will be important for it to continue to serve as that, but it's also, it would be unfortunate if it were seen as a substitute for a sort of more living monument, the creation of a society, where communities live together. I mean, this is sort of idealistic, of course, but that was the original vision of Dayton, was that Bosnia would come together as a pluralist, integrated society. And Srebrenica is just one example of a place where that vision hasn't unfolded.
It's like, we will have a big conference in Dayton, but I have to say, it's like, from one point, I have to tell you that we have to agree to disagree, because lots of people in Bosnia actually believes that Dayton Peace Agreement is what's holding us back, because it had an idea of how to create a divided society, because it drew the lines through the country. So the moment when you do that, it's like, and I'm afraid that places like Srebrenica are really left behind in big part because of the lines that were drawn.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. So I'm going to disagree, which is to say I agree with you there. No, I guess what I mean is that the vision of Dayton was that it would empower moderating forces to eventually make these boundaries irrelevant. Make them sort of the way that the boundaries between, within the European Union are, they're relevant but not that relevant. And I think that was the vision of the political vision, of the political geographical vision of Dayton. It didn't anticipate, or it failed to create the incentives to truly empower those moderate forces, and instead it empowered more extremist and divisionist forces. And so instead of becoming less relevant, the borders and the distinctions between entities are more relevant than ever, which was not the intention of Dayton. It's certainly what happened, and it's certainly a product of Dayton as it was designed, but I think it was the authors of the Accord, the designers of the Accord would say, no, we didn't want that to happen. That happened in spite of our desires. Maybe not in spite of the design of the program, but it was a bad design vis-a-vis what they wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, it's like, signatures, I do believe, understood better what will happen, but that's...
No, that's true. That's true.
That's
too.
also, we are coming to the end of our 30-minute session, but I wanted to ask you something which I think is very important for the podcast as an idea, and that is involvement of the academic society into the subject. We know a lot about testimonials. We did lots of art. It's like we even, Quo Vadis say that it is about genocide was nominated for an Oscar. So we did in those fields, we actually did, I feel, a lot. But what do you think is now a mission of academic society? What us as researchers should actually do?
It's a really good question, because sometimes I feel like academics are, I don't want to say exactly powerless here, but that academics, they render themselves powerless sometimes by being too devoted to the sort of methodologies embedded in their disciplines. And I think what I find encouraging about something like genocide studies, as a field anyways, a multidisciplinary field, is that there's this willingness to ask questions that are that transcend the disciplines and that are not sort of beholden to methodology. Yes, you have oral history. Yes, you have archival research. Yes, you have game theoretical analysis, but it's all just sort of intellectual flying in circles, unless you can relate it to real issues. For me, there's very few issues that are more real than trying to understand or figure out if the world is ever going to prevent genocide and other mass atrocities, if there's ever going to be a way in which that happens. Now, is it the job of academia to come up with that way? Not entirely. It's the job of politicians and global bureaucrats, but
political studies also.
Yes, informed by political science. Put it another way, I think that uninformed by academic study, people can make up all sorts of stuff. History is, if you let a politician tell you what happened in history, you will get a very one-sided version, and probably factually wrong very frequently from whatever side they are. So, and of course some historians will be inclined to sort of feed those narratives as well. But the academic historian history that I'm familiar with, that I like to support, is the kind that adds nuance to the different to events, to history, that sort of says, well, common understanding is that this happened. Again, and now I'm going, in a way, I'm sounding a little bit like our conspiracy theorists that we spoke about at the beginning. But that kind of, maybe it's not adding nuance so much as they have a role of policing the boundaries of the politicization of history. So that's one of the things that historians can do. Political scientists can think about the ways in which, at the international relations level, how do countries react with one another? What are their incentives for engaging in say, preventive action when there is a risk of atrocities, and what are their incentives for following political opportunity when those risks arrive. And then what can you do to change the incentive structure so that more countries, and it's going to be different for different types of countries, big, small, medium powers, but to change the incentive so that they're more inclined to take an anti-atrocity stance when the threat arrives. That's a big challenge, but I think it's one that political scientists, international relations scholars can and should be asking, and can and should be trying to think about. So I think whether it's backwards-looking history, forwards-looking political science, present-looking sociology and psychology, there's a lot to try to understand, a lot that we don't know, and a lot that we can do better on. And I hope that academic study of genocide contributes to that.
Well, we are leaving this podcast with a very big thought and very big job to do for all of us. Thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you very much for having me.